All right, guys, so our doom spiral towards a potential regional war is continuing as Israel is now threatening to bomb not only Iranian oil rigs, but also nuclear sites in response to that attack by Iran against Israel that I covered a couple of days ago on this channel. In addition, based on some of the other statements that I've seen both from Israeli and US officials, it seems like they really want to use this as an opportunity to push for regime change in Iran, which, if you saw the catastrophic outcomes from the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, multiply that by 10, multiply it by 100, and that's what it would look like if we actually had an all-out war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Okay, now let's keep in mind how we got to this position in the first place, right? What is the broader context of all of this? Why did Iran launch this attack? About 180 ballistic missiles towards Israel, where based on what we know so far, zero civilian casualties. They pretty much exclusively went after military targets. Why did Iran launch that attack? Well, they made it pretty explicitly clear. It was in response to the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, where Israel flattened multiple apartment buildings in that bombing. And it was also in response, I think more importantly, to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the top Hamas political leader, while he was on Iranian soil. I want you guys to just pause and reflect on what the United States of America would do if we were hosting a foreign leader and a foreign country assassinated that leader while they were on U.S. soil. What would the United States do in response to that? The further broader context, outside of those two direct reasons for this Iran attack, we are now 11 months in to a genocide in Gaza. Israel has bombed schools, mosques, churches, UN shelters, refugee camps. They've targeted journalists, aid workers, UN workers. Everything under the sun has been destroyed in Gaza. They've displaced the entire population, right? We've also seen a dramatic escalation of violence in the West Bank, as well as the escalation of the expansion of the illegal settlements into Palestinian territories by Israel. We have also seen a mass pager terrorist attack inside of Lebanon that Israel waged. We're now also seeing an invasion and a bombing campaign inside of Lebanon. On top of all of that, we've seen other examples again, like the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, as well as the bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria. So that is the broader context of how we got to this position in the first place. It's important to remind ourselves that at any point over the last 11 months, as we have been taking step after step after step up the escalation ladder to get to where we are right now, that the Biden administration could have stepped in at any point throughout this and stopped it all. The only reason why the Houthis are attacking in the Red Sea, why Hezbollah has been getting into a tit-for-tat with Israel on their northern border, the only reason that there is this drastic escalation with Iran is because Israel has refused time and time again to end their genocide in Gaza. And the Biden administration has refused to use any of the leverage that he has over Israel, like cutting off the weapons, following U.S. law, following international law, and cutting off the weapon shipments to Israel. He has not used a single lick of leverage over them to bring an end to all of this. And so we're now seemingly on an inevitable trajectory towards an all-out regional war on behalf of Israel, on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's utter insanity. Now, we also have confirmation of this plan here, I guess, from Israel to go after their nuclear sites in Iran, to go after the oil rigs, etc. Here we have former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. Let's go ahead and listen to a little bit of what these guys had to say.
That were sort of defending it, or its insurance policy against an Israeli strike, and that's Hezbollah and Hamas. But those two arms are temporarily paralyzed. So it's like a boxer out in the ring without arms for the next few minutes. Now is the time that we can attack because Iran is fully vulnerable. The Islamic Republic of Iran, it's time to destroy the nuclear program, and finally allow the Iranian people to rise up, the amazing Iranian people who have the worst regime, one of the worst regimes on earth. This is the time, this would be the gift of the Israeli people, the Jewish people, to the Iranian people.
I just want to be precise, Prime Minister. You want Israeli airstrikes to blow up Iran's nuclear facilities and its energy facilities, all the oil wells and the oil-related industry that is the main part of the Iranian economy.
That's correct.
Absolute bloodthirsty, psychopathic motherfuckers. Okay? Not trying to exaggerate, not trying to be hyperbolic. This is utter insanity, guys. You could take all of the consequences of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, multiply it by 10, multiply it by 100. Either way, you'll be somewhat close to accurate in terms of how catastrophic an all-out war with Iran would be. For Iran, for Israel, for the entire region, also for the United States, who I think would inevitably have to get involved. I mean, also keep in mind that the only reason guys like Naftali Bennett feel confident in saying these kinds of things is because they know that the U.S. has their back throughout this entire process. If the Israeli officials thought that they had to stand on their own 2 feet going into these situations they're getting themselves into, I don't think that they would be doing it, right? It's only because they have the full, unquestioned support from the Biden administration, from the U.S. government, that they think that they can get away with this kind of stuff. All right. So he confirms there. And he also adds on sort of like an anti-Semitic, statement as well to this, where he says this would be a gift from the Jewish people. No, it's not a gift from the Jewish people, right? We're talking about actions taken by the Israeli government. Okay. That's not the same thing as the Jewish people. In fact, there are many Jewish people in the United States and around the world, and also some inside Israel as well, who completely disagree with the actions of the Benjamin Netanyahu government. But he is, going out of his way to attach whatever Israel does to the entirety of the Jewish people. Absolutely unhinged. Now, we have a response here reported by Sina Tusi saying that multiple IRGC-affiliated Iranian outlets and Telegram channels are reporting that, quote, Iran has warned the U.S., if you target our refineries, we will set fire to the refineries and oil fields across the entire region, including those in Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, Kuwait, the UAE, and Bahrain. So, again, we could have had a potential off-ramp here. The Iranian government, after they launched the ballistic missiles at Israeli military facilities, they said, this is it for now, right? Unless Israel escalates in response to this, then this can be it. We don't need to go to regional war, right? Iran felt the need in order to maintain their standing, in order to maintain sort of a posture of strength, that they had to do something in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh by Israel on their soil. So they thought they had to do something, and they're saying, this is it. This is that something, right? Again, keeping in mind, as of right now, there are 0 civilian casualties reported. I don't even know if there were any people killed as a part of these attacks. There was military infrastructure that suffered some pretty significant damage. But outside of that, I mean, if the Iranian government is saying, that's it for now, don't escalate further, or else, and here's the or else, we will potentially respond by attacking oil refineries around the entire region. Keeping in mind, also, we have 40,000 troops in the Middle East, right? The United States government does. Those men and women would also be in potential jeopardy. So Israel looks like it's inevitable for them that they are going to respond with a massive escalation of bombing Iranian oil rigs and bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. So what happens after that? What happens after that? Is Biden just going to, with his dying brain, walk backwards into another pointless, destructive, deadly, endless war in the region? Is that what we're doing right now? Now, we also have this here from President Biden himself. When he was asked if there's a possibility that Israel would strike Iran's oil facilities, he responded, we're discussing that. You're discussing that. So he's not against it. He said, I think in a different statement, he's against the bombing of the nuclear sites. But he said, we're discussing that in response to Israel's threats to blow up Iranian oil facilities. Now, I also want to make this point as well. If the goal is to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, right? If that's the goal, we already had sort of a playbook for that. It was under the Obama administration. It was the Iran nuclear deal. Trump ripped it up to shreds. Biden didn't do anything to get us back into that deal. And now we're in the position that we are right now. The way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is to make it so that they don't feel like they need one for self-preservation. That's the way that you would prevent it, right? You would make peace with Iran. If you're threatening them with regime change, if you're threatening to bomb their oil facilities and their nuclear sites, do you think that that's a motivation for them to not get a nuclear weapon? No, that's a motivation for them to get a nuclear weapon. So it's just a bizarre, fundamental strategy here as well. Now, we also have this here, again, from the White House. The article here from Politico feels like the 1,000th time I've read this kind of a headline over the last couple of months, but they say White House settles on trying to limit Israel's response to Iran rather than to stop it completely. This has been the entirety of the last year of the genocide in Gaza, Israel's violent actions in the West Bank, now in Lebanon, and now also posturing towards Iran. This has been the same kind of headline every single time. Every single time. The Biden administration acting as if they are completely powerless to stop Israel from doing anything. No, we're just going to give them like a polite conversation behind the scenes and tell them maybe don't, directly get us involved in World War III immediately, right? I mean, it's just fucking pathetic. It's pathetic. As pointed out here by Adam Johnson, he says, it's important to understand, from a media perspective, that the point of these Biden is helpless and stumbling empire articles is not to report an underlying reality. It is to curate spin for the White House so that they can distance themselves from the nonstop carnage on your timeline. That's exactly what this is. This is propaganda. That's what this is. There's nobody that believes that Joe Biden, that the White House, that the U.S. government broadly can't stop Israel from doing anything. Nobody believes that. We've seen it from previous American presidents as well. Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush. We've seen time and time again. Biden has been the most lenient president in American history. The most full-throated supporter of Israel in America's history, which is utterly insane because every American president has been pro-Israel. Biden has taken it to an entirely different level where now his administration and broadly the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are just completely incapable of trying to exercise any sort of power over one of our allies. I mean, I'm trying to position myself to think, like, what if this same kind of situation was happening with a different one of America's allies? Like, is this specific to Israel, or would we do this for anybody, right? If Germany was taking the kind of actions, the kind of escalatory steps that Israel is taking right now, would we stand by them the entire way? We wouldn't try to exercise any sort of power over them? I doubt it. But when it comes to Israel, it's like the U.S. government, the most powerful military, the largest economy on the face of the planet, suddenly completely powerless to do anything. Even again, if that anything is simply following U.S. law, which dictates that the weapons we're sending to Israel are completely illegal. If we weren't sending the weapons to Israel in violation of U.S. law, in violation of international law, then Israel could not continue to do this. Israel wouldn't be posturing about blowing up Iranian nuclear sites if they didn't think the U.S. had their back. That wouldn't be happening. Now, we also have, in case there was any sort of doubt that Biden knows exactly what he's doing right now. This is an amazing statement here. Biden told confidants that he did not believe his Israeli counterpart wanted a ceasefire deal. You don't say. Arguing that Netanyahu was trying to perpetuate the conflict to save his political future and assist Trump in November's election. This is literally almost word for word what I've been telling you guys for months now. So this is clarification that not only are we right about that, but that Biden is fully aware that he's being played by Netanyahu. That as the U.S. comes out constantly and says, oh, we're in favor of a ceasefire deal, that he knows that Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire deal, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's with Lebanon, now potentially with Iran as well. He's fully aware of the situation that he's in, and he's fully aware that Netanyahu wants the Democrats to lose this election. And even with that situation, he's doing nothing about it. Nothing. It's amazing. Again, I said in my last video, it's like the first time in history where a political party in the U.S. has done an October surprise to themselves intentionally, knowingly. You guys are not only doing, I think, the legally wrong thing, but also the politically wrong thing. You're shooting yourself in the foot by tying yourself at the hip to everything that Netanyahu wants to do. And again, he's fully aware of this entire dynamic. Now, we also have here from Kamala Harris a statement on Iran's attack against Israel. This is amazing. Here are the quotes. Iran is a destabilizing, dangerous force in the Middle East, and today's attack on Israel only further demonstrates that fact. She continues, as I've said, I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist militias. My commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering. And let us be clear, Iran is not only a threat to Israel, it's also a threat to American personnel in the region. They say American interests and innocent lives across the region who suffer at the hands of Iran-based and Iran-backed terrorist proxies. Iran is a destabilizing, dangerous force in the Middle East. Now, you don't have to be a fan of the Iranian government. I'm not. But you don't have to be to understand who's doing the destabilization right now in the region. Again, do we have to go backtrack through the list again of what we've seen from Israel over the last year? 11 months of genocide in Gaza, expansion of the completely illegal settlements into the West Bank, a mass terrorist pager attack in Lebanon, a bombing campaign in Lebanon, now an invasion of Lebanon, blowing up an Iranian embassy in Syria, assassinating foreign leaders on Iranian soil. Who's doing the destabilization here? Who's doing it? If the U.S. was a country in the same region as Israel and Israel had done this kind of shit to us, do you think we would have been as restrained as Iran has been? No, of course not. Of course not. The restraint of the Iranian government is the only reason that we have not gotten to an all-out war in the region so far. That's the only reason. Now we move on, because we also had this bizarre moment in the debate last night. Now, I didn't have a separate video covering this debate between the vice presidential candidates, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, mostly because it wasn't that interesting, to be honest, right? There were a couple notable moments that you could have pulled out of there, but it wasn't that interesting to me. But this was interesting. So, I kid you not, the first question in this debate wasn't, do you support a ceasefire in Gaza, right? Do you support, potentially having American lives on the line to fight a war with Iran on behalf of Israel? No, the first question in this debate gives you a good picture of where we're at as a country was, do you support preemptive strikes on Iran? That was the first question in this debate. Do you support preemptive strikes on Iran? They both gave horrible answers, okay? But something I thought was interesting here from Tim Walz, and I don't know if he was misspeaking here or if this was intentional. I haven't seen any sort of correction from this statement, but here's the direct quote. The expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States. That's the direct quote of what he said in this debate. Now, again, maybe he misspoke. If he did, he should come out and correct that immediately. But otherwise, is he just literally saying it is a fundamental necessity for the United States for Israel to expand their borders? Huh? What? What are we doing here, guys? I mean, keeping in mind that one of the main lines from the Biden administration, from Kamala, from Democrats broadly, and many Republicans as well, about Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been, well, they're trying to expand their territorial boundaries by force. That's imperialism. That makes Putin a brutal war criminal, right? Which he is, by the way, but that's been one of the main go-to lines. Now we got a vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side of the equation saying the expansion of Israel is a necessity for the United States? What the fuck is that? What is that? I mean, you guys explain this to me. I don't know. I have no idea what the hell he was talking about here. Absolutely wild. Now, he also started his statement, by the way, by lying about October 7th in, again, just a very strange way. He said there were 1,400 civilians who were massacred on October 7th. That's like the first number that the IDF threw out. That was corrected within, I think, a couple of days or a couple of weeks at least. It was revised down to like 1,200 people who were killed because 200 of those were Hamas militants who were killed by Israel. And if you want to talk about the amount of civilians, I mean, there were hundreds of IDF soldiers who were killed as a part of that attack. There were who knows how many people who were killed by the IDF when they were responding to the Hamas attack. So just like bizarre inaccuracies there from Tim Walz as well. And again, J.D. Vance was no better. If anything, he was arguably worse in his response to this question. We have a uniparty here, at least on this issue. When it comes to foreign policy here, both parties extremely hawkish in nuanced different ways, but both extremely hawkish. Now, we also have here from an absolute ghoul over at the State Department, Matthew Miller, who was asked a question by a journalist, Prem Thacker, in one of these State Department press briefings. And he sort of let the mask slip here a little bit. He said, this is a direct quote, guys, "We've never wanted to see a diplomatic resolution with Hamas." Huh. Now, it's pointed out here by Arnaud. He says this is an incredible thing to say because the ceasefire the U.S. were telling us they were negotiating during months were always between Hamas and Israel. Who else were they going to broker a ceasefire deal with, as well as the release of hostages? So this is Matthew Miller admitting here that not only has Benjamin Netanyahu been against a ceasefire deal, but so has the U.S., unless you're under the impression that somehow Hamas was going to agree to a ceasefire deal that included their own destruction. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, he's saying we never wanted to see a diplomatic resolution with Hamas. What he means there is maybe we would have been okay with a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, but we were never going to be okay with negotiating with Hamas in the long run, right? We want somebody else to be in charge of Gaza. Now, you may support that. The two questions I would have is, number one, who? And number two, how? Right? Two questions that he couldn't answer, right? But again, an incredibly revealing statement there. We never wanted to see a diplomatic resolution. So what the fuck have you been telling the American people for the last 11 months? When you've been saying, oh, we're in favor of a ceasefire. Hamas is the blockade to a ceasefire. What was that all about? Just a complete lie, I guess? And we also have here, some new lows being explored by the United States. I honestly, at this point, I didn't think it was possible that we could reach new lows, but the U.S. State Department going out of their way, being really creative here to find those lows. So Rashida Tlaib was calling out here that she saw an article quoting the State Department claiming that this man who was killed in Lebanon by Israel, who was an American citizen, but this State Department article said he wasn't an American, all while his family is in mourning and having services for him in his community, right? Here in the United States, his family's here. So here was the quote from the State Department. It's our understanding that it was a legal permanent resident, not an American citizen, but we obviously offer our sincerest condolences to the family on their loss. Oh, I'm sure. That was our boy Matthew Miller again. Now, they also add here, importantly, that Jawad was not just a U.S. resident, but also an American citizen. So he was, according to his family. His daughter, Nadine, said that he was killed in the southern Lebanese town of Nabateh, might be butchering that pronunciation, but he was killed while he was helping elderly and displaced people. So, again, to summarize, not only, as I covered in my video a couple of days ago, is the United States not helping American citizens to get out of Lebanon, to save them from Israel potentially killing them with American weapons, not only are we not helping them to get out, as many other countries have done, by the way. I saw articles about China helping some of their citizens get out of Lebanon. Not only are we doing that, but when an American citizen is killed by Israel, likely with U.S. weapons, in Lebanon, our government is coming out and lying about them, lying about the people who have been killed, and saying they're not American citizens, disavowing them. Is this not some of the bleakest shit that you've ever seen? Saying he's not an American citizen. Oh, he may be a legal permanent resident, which, by the way, as his family points out here, isn't even true. He is an American citizen. But the U.S. government is saying, well, maybe he's a legal permanent resident, but we don't think he's an American citizen. So it's okay, right? Jesus Christ, man. Again, new lows being unlocked that I never thought were possible. Now, at the same time, I think the self-isolation on the global stage that Israel has been engaging in, creating themselves into sort of a pariah state, is escalating significantly at this point. So we've been keeping track of the potential ICC arrest warrants coming for Netanyahu as well as Yoav Gallant. We've been keeping track of the ICJ case of genocide against Israel. We've been keeping track of generally what the United Nations is saying about this entire situation. And so amidst all of that, here comes Israel Katz, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel. He says, today, I have declared the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres persona non grata in Israel and banned him from entering the country. They declared the Secretary General of the fucking United Nations as persona non grata. I think when you get to that point, you should be asking the question, are we the baddies, right? Maybe the United Nations, a vast majority of countries around the world, maybe they can't all be wrong. Maybe every single human rights organization on the face of the planet can't all be wrong, right? Maybe we're doing something to deserve criticism. But no. Instead, they say, we're going to declare the Secretary General of the UN persona non grata. He's banned from coming to Israel. I wouldn't have recommended him going to Israel anyways, right? Keep in mind, Israel has killed hundreds of UN workers in Gaza since October 7th. It has been, I think, by far the deadliest war, or in this case, a genocide, the deadliest conflict in modern history for United Nations workers. So after killing, dozens, if not hundreds of his colleagues, they're banning him from entering the country. Now, of course, they go on to explain how, he didn't condemn the Iranian attack, and he didn't condemn the sexual atrocities on October 7th, the sexual atrocities that nobody seems to be able to provide any evidence for. So therefore, we're banning him from the country. Okay, now, we also had, same time, at the United Nations, the Israeli ambassador, with no irony whatsoever, declaring that firing hundreds of missiles into civilian areas is pure evil, talking about the Iranian attack. Now, again, it doesn't look like they fired indiscriminately into civilian areas. It looks like they were actually pretty precise in their strikes, and they targeted Israeli military facilities strategically, right? He says this is pure evil. So this is pure evil, but Israel, again, spending 11 months destroying a majority of the infrastructure in Gaza, displacing the entire population, intentionally blocking aid and starving them, that's not evil, right? That's self-defense. But this is evil. When Iran bombs Israeli, airfields, that's evil, right? What Israel's doing, not evil. Flattening entire apartment buildings, no. That's totally fine, justified, self-defense, most moral army in the world. Now, as pointed out by Sean here, and I think this is a good point, you can do what I just did and point out the obvious brazen hypocrisy of this kind of a statement. But it's deeper than that. He says here, people call this hypocrisy, but it isn't. It's dehumanization. He probably genuinely thinks that it's bad to shoot missiles at civilians. He just doesn't consider any Palestinians to be civilians or even people at all. And it's hard to argue with that. I think he may be right about that. Because there's no possible way to make the argument internally in this guy's own head that Israel has not been firing into civilian areas in Gaza. The only way you could justify that in your head is if you don't think that they're people, right? If you think they're all evil terrorist monsters, right? They're savages, they're barbarians. They're not people. That's how you can internally justify that in your head. So again, it's not just a hypocrisy angle with this kind of a statement. It's also a dehumanization. Now, we also had this, and I'll link this down below if you want to go watch this video here that was posted by Channel 4. It looks like the massacres in Gaza are continuing on a daily basis. Now, as Mehdi Hassan points out here, and this is in response to, again, 51 people, including children and women, being attacked in this one strike. Now, Mehdi Hassan, again, points out in response to this that we live in a world where there has been more outrage from Western politicians and pundits over Iranian strikes on Israeli military targets that didn't kill people than there has been over Israeli strikes on Palestinian civilian targets that killed over 50 people. He's 100% correct. I mean, I've watched CNN, MSNBC, a few other outlets over the last couple of days just to check in and see what their coverage has been like. I mean, it's very easy to get them to, wall to wall have absolutely ballistic coverage of how evil Iran is and how they're escalatory and how there needs to be some sort of a severe response to this terrorism, right, of attacking Israel. And then you get situations like this, and it's like, this is a daily fucking occurrence at this point. 51 people killed. Okay, I think that's below the average of how many people in Gaza have been killed on a daily basis since October 7th. This won't even get remotely a mention from the CNNs and MSNBCs and Fox Newses of the world. This kind of a massacre, 51 people, mostly women and children, this won't get any coverage from U.S. outlets. But you can bet your ass, you go turn on CNN right now, they're going to be talking about how, they'll probably have John Bolton on as a guest. In fact, I saw him earlier today on CNN talking about how we need to bomb Iranian nuclear facilities for how savage they were for, attacking Israeli military facilities. This is the kind of coverage you get from U.S. media. It's very rare that you have, outlets like Channel 4 News that have been doing a fantastic job in their coverage on Israel and Gaza. Now, to finish off here, to make a political point, again, it's not the most important aspect of any of this, aside from the humanity of everything and how genuinely terrifying this entire situation is. But the political aspect should be important, at least to politicians like Biden, like Kamala, like Tim Walz, etc. If you want to win this election, you have to change policy. You have to. This is a seriously significant issue, whether it's the genocide in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, the invasion of Lebanon, a potential war breaking out between the United States, Israel, and Iran. All of this is incredibly important to this election, right? This is just one poll. This is just one aspect of this. 81% of Arab American voters say that Gaza is somewhat important to their vote. So this is just talking about Gaza. Imagine the political ramifications if Israel gets into an all-out war with Iran, right? So this would be significantly worse, not just for Arab American voters, but for voters across the board, right? But 81% of Arab Americans say that Gaza is important to their vote. Now, he does a comparison here, Prem, on how many Arab Americans live in these swing states versus how many Joe Biden won by in these swing states back in 2020, right? So in Michigan, there are close to 400,000 Arab Americans. Joe Biden won the state by 154,000 votes in 2020. So almost, more than double the margin of his victory last time is how many people, how many Arab Americans are in this state. Keeping in mind, 81% of them. So clearly surpassing the margin there. Say Gaza is important to their vote. In Pennsylvania, there are 126,000 Arab Americans. Joe Biden won the state by 80,000. In Arizona, there are about 78,000 Arab Americans. Joe Biden won the state by 10,000. In Georgia, it's 58,000 to 11,000. In Wisconsin, it's 31,000 to 20,000. So all of these key swing states have massive Arab American populations that could decide this election because Joe Biden does not want to stand up. Joe Biden wants to allow Israel to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, even if it means destroying his own party's political chances in this upcoming election. I mean, absolutely insane stuff here, guys. Now, it's also not just Arab Americans that are affected by this. I mean, I'm not an Arab American. This certainly is having an impact on how I would make a decision in this election. There are countless other young people and people of all different sort of backgrounds and ethnicities and demographics, etc. That this means a lot, and I think for good reason. Now, finish off here, because we also have this bleak reality of American politics and how our economy works here. Even though the general stock market, like the Dow Jones, the S&P, the NASDAQ, were down yesterday, don't worry, because Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and RTX, Raytheon Technologies, is significantly up. So the war industry, the military-industrial complex, riding high right now on a potential war breaking out. Keeping in mind that, as Rashida Tlaib points out here, members of Congress are able to own these stocks. Members of Congress, the people who could make a decision as to whether or not we're going to go to war with Iran, have potentially direct investments in the companies that would profit from that exact same scenario. So there you go, guys. We have a lot more that we're going to have to get into over the next couple of days. I cover this. This is, I think, the main story I've been covering for months at this point because I think it's important, right? This is exactly the nightmare situation that we've been warning about. This is the worst case scenario that we are staring down the barrel of. And I guess the question is, I would say it's a question, but I think the reality is at this point that Joe Biden is not going to do anything to prevent any of this. He's just along for the ride. I don't know if it's because he's senile. I don't know if it's because he just supports all of this and this is what he wants to do, but absolutely catastrophic consequences on the horizon for everybody, for the people of Iran, for the people of Israel, for the people of Lebanon, for the people of Palestine, for the people of the United States. Absolute fucking disaster. And an entirely preventable one as well. Important to remember that. An entirely preventable one.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying